He gave the order the way a man orders coffee. Quiet. Certain. Like the answer had already been decided before the question finished leaving his mouth. Does anyone here have long-range qualification? 200 meters or better. Step forward now. Nobody moved. 41 personnel standing in a loose formation at the edge of a forward operating base in the Kunar Province, Afghanistan, October 2009. The wind came down off the ridgeline, smelling like cold rock and diesel. Nobody moved because nobody wanted to be the answer to that question. Not on a day like this one. Not with what they'd all seen come back from the high ground the week before. Then, from somewhere near the back of the formation, a single boot scraped gravel. Captain Renwick looked up from his clipboard. The woman who had stepped forward was not what anyone in that courtyard expected. She was 5'4", maybe 130 pounds with her kit on. Her rank tab said specialist. Her name tape said Breck. She had the kind of face that looked younger than her 29 years. Brown eyes, dark hair tucked under her patrol cap, a thin scar along her left jawline that she'd stopped explaining to people 3 deployments ago. She wasn't looking at Renwick when she stepped forward. She was looking at the ridgeline. Specialist, Renwick said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite a question. More like a challenge wearing the clothes of a question. Sir, she said, what's your range? Confirmed to 840, she said, under field conditions. The clipboard came down. Renwick looked at her for a long time, the way men look at things they've decided not to believe yet. 840 meters. Yes, sir. And you've done this. Where exactly? Fort Bragg, 2 tours in Kandahar, 1 in Mosul. She paused. And last Tuesday, sir, on the range at Bagram. I have the log if you need it. Renwick didn't ask for the log. He didn't say anything for a moment. The wind moved through the formation. Somewhere behind the perimeter wall, a generator cycled up and steadied. Follow me, he said. Her full name was Sable Breck. She'd grown up in Billings, Montana, the youngest of 4, the only girl, in a house where the television was always on but nobody really watched it. Her father had been a surveyor for the County Road Commission for 31 years. Her mother taught middle school math. On weekends, her father took her brothers hunting in the Beartooth Range, mule deer. Mostly, sometimes elk. And when Sable was 8, she asked to come along, and nobody thought to say no. She was a better shot than all 3 of her brothers by the time she was 12. Not because she practiced more, because she understood distance differently. Her father's work had given her that. She'd spent enough time in the truck watching him measure and calculate and remeasure that distance had become something she could feel the shape of. She understood it as a physical fact, not an estimate. When she looked at a hillside through a scope, she wasn't guessing, she was solving. The Army noticed this about 4 months into her training at Fort Jackson, when her marksmanship scores came back in a range the scoring rubric didn't have a category for. Her drill sergeant, a man named Pollard, who had been in the infantry for 14 years and had seen most things, looked at her target for a long time without speaking. You shoot before? He finally asked. Yes, Sergeant. How long? Since I was 8. He nodded slowly. You ever think about Scout Sniper? I didn't think that was open to me, Sergeant. He looked at her, then at the target again. It's not, he said. But some things have a way of happening anyway. She never formally went through sniper school. What she did, instead, was stranger, and in some ways more thorough. She became the person units called when they needed something solved at distance and didn't have another option. She was attached, seconded, temporarily assigned. She existed in the margins of military paperwork, in the footnotes of after-action reports, in the part of the form that says additional personnel and then lists a name and a serial number and nothing else. She was good at being the footnote. What she was even better at was the shot. The position Renwick took her to was on the 3rd floor of a partially destroyed school building at the edge of the village of Azrat Baba, approximately 900 meters from a ridgeline that the intelligence reports were calling a likely vehicle staging area and the soldiers on the ground were calling something less printable. The problem, Renwick explained, was a command vehicle. White Toyota Land Cruiser, antenna cluster on the roof, had been observed at the staging area twice in the past 6 days. The vehicle coordinated insurgent fire along a 3-kilometer stretch of road that had cost 4 American lives and 11 wounded in the past month. If the vehicle was there, There was communication. If there was communication, there was coordination. If there was coordination, whatever was happening next would be organized. We need to break the antenna array, Renwick said. Not the vehicle, not the people, the array. Sable looked out the glassless window at the ridgeline. She thought about the angle. The wind had changed direction twice since they'd climbed up here. What's the crosswind reading? She asked. Renwick's aide, a young sergeant named Foss. And this detail mattered because Foss would spend the next 20 minutes making his feelings about this situation very clear through expression alone, pulled out a kestrel and read her the number. What about 6 hours ago? She asked. Foss blinked. Ma'am, the wind reading 6 hours ago. And 12. I need to know the pattern, not the snapshot. Foss looked at Renwick. Renwick looked at Sable. Something shifted in the way he was standing. Get her the logs, he said. She spent 40 minutes with the wind data and a worn notebook she pulled from her chest pocket. The notebook was full of columns of numbers, not notes, not reminders, numbers. Calculations she'd carried forward from previous positions in previous provinces, adjustments she'd made and kept because the math was worth keeping. She wrote new numbers next to old ones. She crossed things out and rewrote them. She did not use a calculator. When she was done, she looked up. The vehicle. How long does it typically stay at the staging area? Observed window is 12 to 20 minutes, Renwick said, and arrival time? Between 1400 and 1430, the past two appearances. She looked at her watch. It was 13:11. I'll need something to brace against the windowsill, she said. Not sandbags. Something hard. A rucksack frame will work if there's nothing else. Foss started to say something and then didn't. What most people don't understand about long-range shooting, the kind that happens at distances where the target appears smaller than the period at the end of this sentence, is that it has almost nothing to do with the trigger. By the time you're 800 meters out, the bullet has been traveling for more than a second. It has already begun to drop. It has been pushed by wind that may have shifted since you last measured. It has been affected by the temperature differential between the barrel and the ambient air. It has been subject to the Coriolis effect, which sounds like physics homework until you realize that the Earth's rotation genuinely affects a projectile at that distance by a calculable number of centimeters. There is almost nothing you can do once the bullet leaves the barrel. Everything that matters happened before you pulled the trigger. This is what Sable Breck had understood since she was 8 years old, watching her father measure a hillside with a transit level and 100 feet of chain. Her father always said the same thing when his brothers ribbed him about being slow, about taking so long to get a reading. Measure twice so you only have to do it once. He was talking about road surveys. She had applied it to something else. At 14:17, the white Land Cruiser appeared at the staging area. She had been lying prone at the windowsill for 56 minutes. Her breathing was slow, and even in a way that wasn't disciplined so much as it was the absence of urgency. She had stopped being anxious about this shot approximately 40 minutes ago when the math told her what she needed to know. Now she was simply waiting for the variables to align with what the math had predicted they would do. Foss was watching through binoculars from 6 feet to her left. Vehicles there, he said, quietly. He'd gotten quieter in the past half hour. I see it, she said. Antenna arrays on the rear roof panel, left side cluster. I see it. She did the final adjustment. The wind had done exactly what she predicted it would do. Shifted 4 degrees south in the past 40 minutes, just as the pattern from the morning data suggested it would. She moved the elevation turret one click. She settled back into the stock. Movement at the vehicle, Foss said. I know. 2 men had gotten out. One of them was walking toward the vehicle's rear. She watched his path. If he stopped at the antenna cluster, she'd have to wait. She had time. She had probably 4 minutes before the vehicle moved again, based on the observed pattern. The man walked past the antenna cluster and stood at the edge of the ridge looking down at the valley. She exhaled. She fired. The antenna array's left cluster separated from the roof mount cleanly. The bolt caught the base of the primary mast, and the secondary followed it because they were connected and physics doesn't negotiate. The array folded down the left side of the vehicle like a question mark, collapsing. The 2 men outside the vehicle dropped immediately, trained reflex, looking for cover. The vehicle itself started moving within 8 seconds, moving without communication capability. Foss said nothing for a long moment. Then he lowered the binoculars. "You hit what you aimed at," he said. He sounded like a man recalibrating something fundamental. "Yes," she said, "at 863 meters." 861, she said. The wind moved. The after-action report listed the outcome as antenna array neutralized, target vehicle degraded, enemy communications disrupted for an estimated 72-hour period. The intelligence assessment that followed concluded that the disruption had coincided with, and likely contributed to, the failure of a planned coordinated attack along the Kunar Road that had been 6 days in preparation. Sable Breck's name appeared in the report once, in the additional personnel section, followed by her serial number. That was appropriate. That was how she'd always existed in these reports. What was not in the report, what reports never contain, because reports are about outcomes and not about the silence that precedes them, was what happened in the 40 minutes she lay at that window before the vehicle arrived. She wasn't thinking about the shot. She was thinking about a conversation she'd had 7 years earlier, in the parking lot of the VA clinic in Billings, with a man named Craddock, who had been her father's best friend from Vietnam, and who had, in the 3 decades since, become something between a mentor and a warning. Craddock had done 2 tours as a long-range reconnaissance soldier and had come back with his body mostly intact and his sleep permanently altered. He had been the one who first put a quality scope in her hands when she was 14. He had been the one who told her, that day in the parking lot, that the thing she was good at was going to be used by people who didn't understand it. "They'll want results," he said. "They won't want to understand how you got there." She had said that was fine. She didn't need them to understand. "It won't always feel fine," he said. She had been 22 when he said that. She had been 29 when she lay at that window and understood what he meant. It was not that she regretted it. She didn't. She had broken a piece of equipment that was being used to kill Americans on a road in a valley in a province most Americans couldn't find on a map. The math was straightforward. The outcome was clear. What Craddock had meant, she understood this now, was that there would come a day when doing the right thing and being credited for doing the right thing were 2 entirely separate events, and she would have to decide in advance which one she was doing it for. She had decided. But deciding didn't make the parking lot memory go away. 6 months later, Sable was back in the States. Fort Carson, Colorado, attached to a logistics unit in a role that was technically described as marksmanship instructor, small arms, and practically described as a holding pattern. The Army didn't entirely know what to do with her. This was not unusual. The Army often didn't know what to do with people who didn't fit the existing containers cleanly. She taught marksmanship 3 days a week to soldiers who needed remediation on their qualification scores. She was good at it. She was patient, in the way that people are patient when they genuinely understand something. Not because they're suppressing frustration, but because the gap between what they know and what the other person knows seems navigable rather than impossible. It was at Fort Carson in February of 2010 that she met a major named Halstead. Major Diane Halstead ran a unit that existed in the same margins of military paperwork that Sable had occupied for 4 years. She was 44 years old, compact, precise in her movements and her speech, with close-cropped gray-streaked hair and the kind of eyes that were always slightly ahead of the conversation. She had been watching Sable's file for 3 months before she walked into the small arms range on a Tuesday afternoon and stood at the back of the room while Sable worked with a private who was flinching on the trigger brake. Sable didn't look up from what she was doing. "Private?" she said to the young soldier. "What are you afraid of, ma'am?" The private looked confused. "Before the shot, you're already defending against the recoil. That's the flinch. You're afraid of something. What is it?" The private thought about it. "The noise, maybe? The kick? So you're afraid of what happens after the bullet leaves. But by then, the shot is over. There's nothing left to be afraid of." She adjusted the soldier's grip slightly. "The scary thing already happened. You just haven't caught up to that yet." The private fired. The group tightened. Halstead walked to the front of the room when the range was clear. "That's an interesting way to explain it, It's the accurate way," Sable said, and finally looked at her. Halstead handed her a card. It had a phone number on it and nothing else. "I have a problem," Halstead said. "It's the kind of problem that involves distance, precision, and someone who doesn't need to be told twice." Sable looked at the card. Then at Halstead. "What kind of problem?" "The kind they don't write into the paperwork until it's already been solved." The problem, as Halstead explained it over the next 4 days, in a series of conversations that took place in unmarked rooms, in buildings that weren't on any Fort Carson visitor map, involved a network. Not a terrorist network, not an enemy combatant network, a procurement network. American contractors, some of them retired military, who had been systematically redirecting equipment, optics, rangefinders, ballistic computers, away from forward-deployed units and into a secondary market that eventually, through enough intermediaries to be deniable, reached people who were using that equipment against American forces. It had been running for at least 3 years. It had been investigated for 8 months. The investigation had produced evidence. The evidence had been evaluated. The evaluation had been delayed. The delay had continued. "Why are you telling me this?" Sable asked. "Because the investigation is about to go somewhere it can't go officially," Halstead said, "and I need someone who can go with it." Sable was quiet for a moment. "You're not asking me to shoot anyone," she said. "It wasn't a question." "No," Halstead said. "I'm asking you to be present when something is documented. Observed. At distance. In a way that is undeniable." "Observed how?" "There's a meeting. 3 weeks from now. In a location that will be accessible from approximately 650 meters. Halstead paused. "The participants will bring documentation to that meeting. Physical documentation. We need to be able to read it." Sable thought about this. "You need someone who can resolve text at 600 meters. We need someone who can tell us whether the man in the third chair is holding a contract bearing a specific serial number based on what's legible through a spotter scope without any margin for error." "That's not a shot," Sable said. "No," Halstead agreed. "It's harder." She spent the next 3 weeks preparing in ways that had nothing to do with ballistics. She studied the procurement system, learned the contract numbering structure, memorized the serial format, and the page layout of the specific document type they were looking for. She worked with a retired intelligence analyst named Bauer, who had the manner of a man who had given up being impressed by anything long ago and had settled into a kind of equable exhaustion that Sable found oddly reassuring. "You'll need to ID the document format from the header," Bauer told her. "The serial number will be in the upper right corner. 11 digits. First 3 are always 074 for this contract class. Size of the print? .10 font on a standard government form." She did the math. At 650 meters, in good light, with a 60-power spotting scope, .10 font text was on the absolute edge of resolution. She would need conditions. She would need patience. She would need to be right. "What if I can't read it?" she asked. Bauer looked at her. "Then the meeting ends without a record. And 3 months from now, another convoy gets ambushed with equipment that was supposed to be on a different continent." She nodded. She already knew the answer. She had just wanted someone else to say it out loud. The meeting took place on a Saturday morning in a warehouse district outside of Colorado Springs. The observation position was a rooftop, 662 meters from the ground floor window, where, at 9:47 in the morning, 4 men sat around a folding table and did business. Sable had been on the roof since 6 a.m. The light was good. The air was cold, which helped the optics. There was almost no wind, which was not what she'd been prepared for. She'd built her plan around a 5 to 7 knot variable and would have to adjust for the near stillness. Halstead was on the roof behind her. They did not speak. At 9:52, one of the men at the table produced a folder. Sable moved the spotting scope. The folder was open. The document inside was face up. The header was visible. She could see the format. She could see the layout. She moved the scope to the upper right corner. The print was small, smaller than she'd rehearsed for. The man was holding the folder at an angle that helped. The light caught the page cleanly. 074. She continued reading. It took 11 minutes. When she was done, she read back the full serial number without looking up from the scope. Halstead wrote it down. 2 weeks later, 3 men were arrested. A 4th cooperated. The investigation, which had been delayed for 8 months, concluded in 31 days. The warrant cited surveillance intelligence gathered by undisclosed means at the Colorado Springs location. Sable Breck's name did not appear in the warrant. She was, as she had always been, in the footnotes. She was at the VA clinic in Billings the following spring. Not for herself, she would have said if anyone had asked. Craddock had been having a harder year than usual, and she made the drive up from Colorado once a month to sit with him for an afternoon, when Halstead called. "I have another problem," Halstead said. "I figured you would. It's different from the last one." "They always are," Sable said. She was sitting in the parking lot, the same parking lot where Craddock had told her that doing the right thing and being credited for it were two separate events. The same asphalt, the same view of the rimrocks in the distance. "Are you in?" Halstead asked. Sable thought about what Craddock had said and about the private on the range who had been flinching because she was afraid of something that had already happened, and about a folding table in a warehouse district where 4 men had conducted business they thought was invisible. "The scary part already happened," she said. "Excuse me?" "Something I tell new shooters," Sable said. "Nothing." "Yes, I'm in." She put the phone in her pocket and looked at the rimrocks for a while. The rock was pale in the spring light. The distance between where she sat and the base of those cliffs was something she could have told you to within 10 meters without measuring. She had always known the distance. The question was only ever what she did with it.